"You're under arrest, mountain man bounty hunter. Told the fat girl, but she was innocent. You're under arrest." The voice was so deep it seemed to shake the canvas walls of the little tent. Winifred Abernathy froze, the wooden spoon slipping from her fingers and clattering into the pot of rabbit stew. For one suspended heartbeat, she could only stare at the shadow that filled the doorway, blotting out the late autumn light. Then the flap was yanked aside. He had to duck to step in. Gideon Goliath Blackwood wasn't just tall, he was overwhelming. 2 meters and more of solid, scar-mapped muscle wrapped in a black bearskin coat. His dark hair was tied back at his neck, his beard thick, storm-rough. Amber eyes swept the cramped tent in a single, assessing glance, sharp as a hawk's. Twin Colt .45s rode his hips. A long Remington was strapped across his back. A Bowie knife big enough to gut a grizzly gleamed at his shoulder. Winifred's breath hitched. She had heard stories and whispers, even this deep, in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. The bounty hunter who never missed a shot, who tracked men for weeks through blizzards and sandstorms and never came back empty-handed. The one outlaws called Goliath. And now he was here, pointing a gun at her. She lifted her hand slowly, palms shaking. "Please, there's been a mistake." "Name," he said. Winifred Abernathy." Her voice cracked. "I'm not whoever you're looking for." His gaze flicked to her hair, wild curls the color of copper in the firelight, to her soft, rounded body under the too-tight dress, to the way she was breathing too fast, panic turning her cheeks crimson. "Wanted poster says," Gideon said, voice flat. "Female, red hair, heavy set, about 5'5", calls herself Scarlet Sally Malone, bank robber, murderer, last seen heading into these mountains." "I'm not her," Winifred whispered. "I've never robbed anything in my life. I can barely steal an extra biscuit from my own stew pot." He didn't smile. His eyes swept the tent again. No stolen money, no guns, just a rough-built bed, a Bible with pages worn soft, a basket of mending, sacks of beans and flour, the aroma of slowly simmering meat. Nothing about this felt like a bandit's hideout. But the wanted posters didn't lie, and Gideon Blackwood had never brought in the wrong person. Not once. Not in 20 years. "Turn around," he ordered. "Hands behind your back." Tears burned Winifred's eyes. Rope scars still ringed her throat, faint but real, a reminder of the gallows she'd narrowly escaped. She had run into these mountains to keep from swinging for a crime she didn't commit, and now the most feared bounty hunter in the territory had found her. "Please," she choked, "you're making a mistake. I'm innocent." "Everybody says that," Gideon replied. But he hesitated, just a fraction of a second, just long enough for doubt to prick the edges of his certainty as he stared at the terrified, trembling woman in front of him. Long enough for the story to start. "Before we follow them deeper into these mountains, tell me, where in the world are you listening from right now?" For a long moment, the only sounds inside the tent were Winifred's uneven breaths and the low simmer of stew bubbling over the fire. Gideon kept his gun trained on her, jaw locked in its familiar unyielding line, but something in his eyes shifted, an almost imperceptible narrowing, like a man seeing a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. "Sit," he ordered. Winifred obeyed immediately, folding onto the wooden stool by the fire. Her hands trembled violently in her lap. Gideon stayed standing, the tent feeling too small for someone his size, too fragile to contain the weight of him. "Start talking," he said. Winifred swallowed hard. What? What do you want to know? Everything, Gideon replied. How you ended up here, why you're running, and why a town full of people swear you murdered 2 lawmen. I didn't, she said quickly, desperately. I swear before God. Swearing doesn't impress me, Gideon said. Facts do. She flinched, but after a moment's hesitation, one last attempt to steady her breath, Winifred began. I was born in Socorro, she said softly. My father was a blacksmith. My mother took in sewing. We weren't wealthy, but we had dignity. Until they died. She paused, twisting a piece of fabric from her skirt in her fingers. After that, I worked as a seamstress in town. Quiet work, honest work. I didn't bother anyone. Her voice shrank. I didn't think anyone even noticed me, except when they wanted to laugh. Gideon didn't blink. Laugh at what? My size, Winifred whispered. My hair, my face. Boys in town would dare each other to call me names. Women would pull their daughters away when I passed, like I carried some kind of shame. Gideon's jaw clenched, hard. But I endured. I always endured, until the day the bank was robbed. Her hands tightened around the cloth so fiercely her knuckles turned white. It all happened so fast. Gunshots, shouting, smoke, and when it was over, 2 men were dead. Someone pointed at me, said they saw the robber, said it was a red-haired woman. Just like her, they told the sheriff. She touched the faint bruise around her throat. They dragged me from my home before I even understood what was happening. Gideon stayed silent, but his eyes flicked to her neck. The rope marks weren't old enough to ignore. The sheriff didn't ask questions, didn't wait for evidence. He told the town I was the killer, that I'd be hanged at dawn. Her breath trembled. The night before the execution, a widow who knew my mother snuck into the jail. She unlocked my cell, told me to run and never look back. Winifred shook her head, tears choking her voice. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to look guilty, but she said if I stayed, I'd die innocent. She lifted her tear-filled eyes to Gideon. So I ran, into the mountains. I've been hiding ever since, eating whatever I can find, sleeping with one eye open, praying every night for someone to believe me. The tent fell into a heavy silence. Gideon didn't move, didn't lower his gun, but something in his gaze had softened, the rigid certainty replaced by a shadow of unease. Scarlet Sally Malone, he said slowly, is a trained shooter, quick on the draw, efficient. You look like you'd faint just holding a gun. Winifred nodded frantically. I would. Show me your hands. Confused, she lifted them. Small, soft, blistered from sewing, not from firing pistols. Gideon's brow furrowed deeper. He looked around the tent again. No stolen money, no ammunition, no saddlebags packed to flee, no weapons. Just a lonely woman with nothing but fear and a pot of stew to her name. Still, he didn't rely on sympathy. He relied on instinct, and instinct told him something here didn't match the wanted poster. Stand up, Gideon finally said. Her legs wobbled as she rose. He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look at him, close enough that the warmth of the fire cast their shadows together on the tent wall. For the record, he said, voice low and almost reluctant, I don't think you planned a murder. Her breath caught. But whether you're innocent or not, he paused, that's something I'll determine myself. He stepped behind her and took her wrists, not harshly, but with the firm, practiced grip of a man who'd restrained hundreds of criminals. She stiffened. I'm not taking you back to Socorro, he said. They'd hang you before I could get a word out. Winifred's breath shook uncontrollably. So, she dared to hope. "You believe me?" "I believe," Gideon said, looping a leather strap loosely around her wrists, "that your story doesn't match the evidence, and until I know the truth, I'm keeping you somewhere safe." "Safe?" she whispered. "You'll stay in my custody," he said, "under my watch, under my rules." A pause. "And no harm will come to you." Winifred's knees nearly gave out in relief. Gideon caught her elbow, steadying her with surprising care. "Pack your things," he said. "We ride now." Behind them, the mountains stood tall and dark, as if holding their breath. The forest closed around them like a cathedral of shadow and pine. Winifred sat stiffly on Gideon's massive black stallion, hands bound loosely in front of her, while the bounty hunter walked beside the horse with long, unhurried strides. He didn't seem the least bit concerned about the fading light or the sharp drop in temperature. The cold bit at Winifred's cheeks. Gideon moved through it like a creature carved from the mountain itself. Every so often he glanced up at her, not long enough to give comfort, but long enough to read every flicker of fear on her face. "You're riding too tight," he finally said. "Relax your legs." I'm trying." "You're squeezing the horse like it wronged you." She eased her grip slightly. The stallion snorted, grateful. Gideon didn't smile, but something eased around the edges of his eyes. For hours they moved through the rugged terrain. Winifred's entire body ached, her knees from gripping the saddle, her wrists from the leather strap, her back from tension so deep she felt carved from stone. The sun slid behind the peaks. Cold spilled into the air like water from a broken dam. Winifred shivered violently. Without a word, Gideon shrugged off his heavy bearskin coat, stepped closer, and draped it across her shoulders. The weight of it was shocking. The scent of smoke, pine, leather, and something faintly warm and animalistic, like the memory of a fire on a winter night. "I can't take this from you," she murmured. "You'll freeze." "I won't," he said simply. She believed him. The man was built like a furnace. For a while the only sounds were hoofbeats and the wind threading through the branches overhead. Winifred's mind kept circling back to the noose she had escaped, to the jeering faces of the townspeople, to the sheriff's cold eyes as he sentenced her without evidence. A tremor went through her. Gideon noticed instantly. "Mind off the rope," he said. "It's behind you." She swallowed. "I keep seeing it, every time I close my eyes." He didn't break stride, didn't look up, but his voice lowered a fraction. "Fear lasts longer than scars, longer than bruises. You'll learn to live with it. Until then, keep your eyes open." She nodded, though she didn't fully understand. They reached a narrow ridge. The path dropped sharply on one side, a sheer cliff disappearing into darkness. Winifred's breath seized in panic. "Don't look down," Gideon said calmly. "Look at me." She tore her eyes from the void and focused on his broad back, the steady swing of his shoulders. "You're safe," he said again. It was the second time he'd said that since meeting her. Both times, her heart clenched as if the words found a place inside her she didn't know existed. At last they reached a plateau, a small clearing ringed by pines. Gideon stopped, looked the area over, and nodded. "We camp here." Winifred blinked in confusion. "Camp? It's too dark to continue." "But your cabin, still 3 hours away." 3 hours more in the cold would have broken her. Gideon tied the horse to a low branch, then pulled a bedroll from his pack and spread it near the trunk of a large pine. "Sit," he instructed. Winifred obeyed, her legs numb with cold and exhaustion. Gideon crouched beside her, his presence filling the air like heat from a forge. He examined the rope marks on her wrists. "These too tight?" "No," she whispered. "You tied them loose." He grunted, a sound almost approving. "Good," he said. "I don't shackle innocence." Her breath hitched. You think I'm innocent?" "I think," Gideon replied, cutting the knots with swift precision, "that a woman who cries stirring stew and apologizes to a horse isn't a killer." Winifred's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She would have laughed if she weren't so tired. Gideon tossed her a blanket from his pack. "Wrap yourself. I'll start a fire." She did as told. The blanket smelled faintly of cedar, and the warmth that seeped through it felt like mercy. While Gideon stacked kindling and struck flint, Winifred watched him, watched the practiced way he moved, the efficiency of each gesture. Nothing wasted, nothing unsure. This was a man who survived by instinct and discipline alone, and now he was responsible for her life. When the fire crackled to life, casting flickering gold across his sharp, powerful features, Gideon sat beside her, not close, but close enough for the heat of him to compete with the flames. "Eat," he said, handing her a tin cup with warm broth. She sipped, surprised by how good it tasted. "Thank you." Gideon nodded, eyes on the fire. Silence settled around them, deep, quiet, almost gentle. But then he spoke. "I'll find the truth," he said, "and if someone framed you—" His jaw hardened. "I'll find them too." Her throat tightened. "Why help me?" He didn't look at her. His gaze stayed on the flames. "Because I don't hunt ghosts," he said, "and I don't drag innocent women to their deaths." Another pause. "And because something's wrong with this case. I can feel it." The wind rustled the pine branches above them, and for a moment Winifred felt something like hope bloom inside her chest, small, trembling, but alive. Gideon leaned back against the tree. "Sleep," he said. "I'll keep watch." Her eyes widened. "All night?" He nodded. "Nobody's touching you on my watch." She lay down, wrapped in his blanket and coat, warmed by the fire and by something she didn't dare name. As she drifted off, the last thing she saw was Gideon, sitting in the shadows, massive arms folded, eyes fixed on the dark woods with the unblinking focus of a guardian beast. Morning seeped through the trees in slow strokes of silver and pale gold. Winifred woke to the sound of embers crackling softly and the heavy, reassuring presence of Gideon standing nearby, arms crossed, scanning the tree line. He hadn't slept, not even for a moment. She pushed herself upright, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. Gideon glanced at her, expression unreadable. "You're awake?" he said. "Good. We ride." They packed quickly. Winifred's muscles screamed from yesterday's journey, but she forced herself onto the saddle without complaint. Gideon adjusted the stirrup for her, his large hands surprisingly gentle. The ride to his home took hours. The higher they climbed, the colder the air became, until Winifred's breath fogged in front of her like a ghost. Pines thickened into a dark wall, broken only when the path widened and Gideon's fortress-like cabin appeared, built from thick stone and timber, set against a cliff face like part of the mountain itself. Winifred stared. "You built this?" "Every stone." It looked less like a home and more like a stronghold, a place meant to withstand storms, gunfire, and the worst the frontier could offer. He lifted her from the saddle with no more effort than if she weighed a sack of grain and nodded toward the heavy door. Inside. She hesitated. He tilted his head slightly. You're safe, Winifred. Go on. Inside, the air was surprisingly warm. A large stone hearth dominated the center room. Hunting trophies hung high on the walls. The kitchen was simple, but fully stocked. A thick rug covered the floor near the fire. Despite its severity, the cabin felt lived in, real. Gideon shut the door behind them, bolted it, then set down his weapons with deliberate care. You're not a prisoner anymore, he said, but you'll stay here until I finish the investigation. I understand. He glanced at her wrists, no longer bound, but still faintly bruised. Guilt flickered across his face, so fast she might have imagined it. I'll show you the room, he said. He walked her down a short hallway. One door was shut, his own, she assumed. The other he opened. This is yours. It was small but clean. A narrow bed with a thick quilt, a wooden chest, a window looking out toward the valley. Winifred stepped inside, touching the edge of the quilt with a shaking hand. I haven't slept in a real bed in I don't know how long, she whispered. You'll sleep in this one, Gideon said. Tonight and every night, until the truth is out. She turned to him, eyes soft with gratitude. Thank you for believing me enough to try. He didn't respond right away. Then, quietly, I didn't believe you. Her heart dropped. Not at first, he continued. But you didn't fit what I expected. And every instinct I have says something about your case stinks. I trust my instincts. It wasn't warmth, but it was honesty, and it meant more to her than any pretty reassurance. Life in Gideon's cabin settled into a strange rhythm. He was distant, but protective, silent, but attentive, gruff, but not cruel. Winifred learned quickly that Gideon wasn't a man of unnecessary noise. He moved through the cabin with the quiet precision of a predator. He cooked in silence, cleaned weapons in silence, chopped firewood with thunderous efficiency, but said almost nothing, and yet she never felt unwelcome. One morning she reached for a pot on a high shelf and nearly lost her footing. Without looking up from the rifle he was oiling, Gideon said, "Don't climb. Ask." "I don't want to trouble you," she murmured. "You'll trouble me more if you break your neck." Another day, as she tried to sweep the stone floor, he took the broom from her hands. "You don't do chores here." "But I want to contribute. Staying alive until I clear your name is contribution enough." Sometimes he frustrated her. Sometimes he stunned her. But every time she thought she understood him, he did something unexpected. On the fifth evening, after she had spent much of the day quietly humming hymns as she mended a torn shirt, Gideon paused in the doorway, listening. "That song," he said. "You sang it in the tent." She flushed. "I didn't know you heard." "I hear everything." A strange silence settled between them. Then he said, almost reluctantly, "You sing well." Her breath caught, because from Gideon that was not a casual compliment. That was a revelation. But the biggest shift came late one night. A storm rolled through the mountains, fierce winds rattling the shutters, thunder shaking the stone walls. Winifred couldn't sleep. Memories of the rope, the jeering crowd, the sheriff's cold voice clawed at her mind. She crept from her room, drawn by the glow of the fire. Gideon sat in his chair, boots planted on the rug, arms folded across his chest. He looked carved from shadow. She hesitated in the doorway. "Couldn't sleep?" he said without looking at her. She wrapped her arms around herself. Nights are the hardest. Sit. She took the chair opposite him close to the fire. Her hand shook slightly, barely noticeable, except Gideon noticed everything. His gaze moved to her fingers, then back to the fire. "You're safe here," he said quietly. It was the third time he'd said it. The third time her eyes stung at the truth she desperately needed. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room. Winifred gasped softly. Gideon looked over, brow slightly drawn. "You afraid of storms?" "I'm afraid of being helpless," she whispered. Gideon leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You survived an attempted hanging. You ran into the mountains alone. You've lived off land that kills most men." His voice softened, not much, but enough to shake her. "You're not helpless, Winifred." Her breath trembled. "Do you really think that?" He held her gaze. "If you were helpless, you'd be dead." Silence fell, not cold, not tense, just full. Thunder rumbled again, but this time Winifred didn't flinch. Not with Gideon there, the fire warm at their feet, his presence steady and unmovable. She didn't know it yet, but this was the night something in him shifted. Subtle, barely there, but real. The night the mountain man began to see not a burden, not a prisoner, but a woman with a spine of quiet steel. A woman he would protect, not because it was his duty, but because he wanted to. The storm passed by morning, leaving the world washed clean. Sunshine spilled across the valley. Birds sang. But inside Gideon Blackwood's mountain fortress, the air felt taut, charged, as if both hunter and guest sensed that the quiet was only an illusion. Winifred rose early, still thinking about the night before. The sound of thunder shaking the cabin, the firelight painting Gideon's face in bronze and shadow, his voice, low, unguarded, telling her she wasn't helpless. No one had ever said that to her. No one had ever believed it. She made coffee, hand steady for the first time in days. Gideon emerged from the hallway, hair damp from washing, shirt pulled over broad shoulders. He looked at her as though examining a sunrise he hadn't expected. "You slept?" he asked. "I did," she answered. "Thank you for staying with me." He grunted softly. "Didn't stay for you. Stayed because storms bring predators closer to the cabin." But Winifred had begun to learn his language. His instincts spoke in warnings, but his heart leaked through the cracks he didn't know he had. She poured him coffee. He took it without a word, but lingered a moment as their fingers brushed. A spark, a pause. Then he stepped back. "I'm going into town," he said. Her heart clenched. "Socorro?" "No." He shook his head. "Too dangerous. I'm riding to a smaller settlement, Tres Piedras. Fewer eyes, fewer tongues, but enough lawmen and trail hands to dig for truth." Fear flickered through her. "You'll leave me alone?" "You'll stay inside," he said firmly. "No exceptions. The cabin door locks from the inside. You'll be safe." He strapped weapons to his belt. Colts, Bowie knife, the long Remington. As he moved, Winifred glimpsed more of the man than just his muscle and scars. There was discipline in him, purpose, and something like weariness carved deep beneath his armor. "Gideon," she said softly, her fingers clutching the mug for courage. "Be careful. Please." He paused at the door, half turned, the light falling over one side of his face. "I always am." It should have been the end of the moment, but he hesitated, just long enough to brush the back of his knuckles along her upper arm before stepping outside. Gideon's horse thundered down the mountain trail, hooves slicing through morning frost. He rode with the focus of a man on the hunt, every muscle coiled with purpose. But under that layer of instinct, something new gnawed at him. He hated the thought of leaving her alone. Ridiculous! She was only a guest, only a witness, only an innocent woman caught in the wrong storm. Then why had her voice stuck in his mind after he rounded the first ridge? Why did the memory of her humming seep through him like warmth after a long winter? He scowled into the wind. He didn't have time for softness, not when the truth was slithering somewhere out there, coiled and poisonous. He needed answers, and he got them. In Tres Piedras, saloon chatter told him more than the sheriff's office ever could. A trail hand recognized Scarlet Sally's description. A bartender admitted she'd been in town 3 weeks before, bragging she had the law eating from her hand. A drunk swore he'd seen her ride south with a man wearing a sheriff's badge. A sheriff's badge? Gideon's pulse slowed, turned to ice. Sheriff Briggs. The same sheriff who'd condemned Winifred without trial. The same sheriff who'd announced her guilt before sunrise the next day. The same sheriff who'd left rope scars around her throat. Briggs wasn't incompetent. He was involved. Gideon strode out of the saloon, boots pounding the dirt. He swung into the saddle, rage simmering. Not the hot, blistering rage of violence, but the cold, calculating fury of a man who had seen corruption poisoning justice far too many times. Winifred Abernathy had been marked for death because she was an easy target. He had seen it before in towns desperate for order. They always blamed the ones least able to defend themselves. He turned the horse toward home, and this time he rode fast. Winifred spent the day in restless silence. She cleaned, she read, she mended Gideon's coat. She tried to keep her mind quiet, but fear coiled under her ribs. Every sound outside made her flinch. At dusk, she peered through the window. The valley glowed with amber light. Birds circled low. The mountains breathed their cold breath across the stones. Yet something felt wrong. She stepped back from the window. 2 riders emerged from the tree line. Her blood froze. Neither was Gideon. They wore badges, silver glints in the fading light. Her heart hammered. She backed away from the door, hands trembling. A fist slammed into the wood. Winifred Abernathy. The voice was deep, angry, and horribly familiar. Sheriff Briggs. "You open up or we burn this place down. We know you're in there." Winifred stumbled back, nearly tripping over a stool. How? How did he find her? Gideon said the cabin was safe. Gideon said no one would. Another blow rattled the door. The bolt strained. "This is your last chance," Briggs roared. "You're coming with us." Her nails dug into her palms as she whispered, "Gideon, please come back." Gideon crested the final ridge just as the smoke hit his nose. Thin, fresh, the kind that came from torches, not the hearth. His heart stopped, then restarted in a roar. His horse bolted down the slope, hooves throwing sparks. Wind whipped his coat back. Fury made his vision sharpen like a blade, because there, outside his cabin, stood Briggs and another deputy, torches in their hands, pounding on his door, his home, his mountain, his protection. And behind that door was Winifred, terrified, cornered, alone. Gideon's pulse thundered with a single thought: not again, never again. He drew his Remington in one swift motion, and the mountain trembled with the force of the man who had come home. Gideon didn't slow. He didn't shout a warning. His horse thundered from the tree line like an avalanche broken loose, and at the first glimpse of Briggs's torch raised toward his cabin door, Gideon fired. The bullet hit the torch dead center. Flame exploded into sparks. Briggs yelped, dropping the burning stick as it burst apart on the dirt. Both lawmen spun around. Gideon reined his horse to a sliding stop, dust swirling around him like smoke. The Remington stayed leveled, steady as a steel promise. "You picked the wrong mountain," he growled. Briggs's face went pale. The deputy's hand twitched toward his holster, then froze when Gideon shifted the barrel an inch in his direction. "Don't," Gideon said. "You won't live long enough to regret it." Inside the cabin, Winifred pressed both hands to her mouth. She'd never heard Gideon like this, voice rough as broken stone, fury vibrating through every syllable. But she wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid for him. "Open the door," he ordered, never taking his eyes off the two intruders. Winifred unbolted it with shaking hands and stepped out onto the porch. The cold slapped her cheeks, but her fear was hotter than the fire Briggs had tried to bring. Briggs sneered at her. "There she is, the little murderer. Did you think you could hide behind him forever?" Winifred's breath hitched, but she didn't move back inside. Gideon's horse stomped, sensing his rage. "She doesn't hide behind me," he said. "She stands where I put her, behind a locked door that was never yours to break." Briggs spat. "She's a fugitive. I'm here to bring her in." "No," Gideon said. "You're here because your lie is falling apart." Briggs's lip curled. "My lie?" "You pinned your botched case on her. Easy target. No family, no power, no voice. Thought no one would bother to dig deeper." Gideon leaned forward in the saddle. "But now, I'm digging." Briggs went stiff. Winifred felt the shift, not in Gideon, but in the sheriff. Beneath the bluster and rage, something ugly flickered. Fear. Gideon saw it too. "It was you," Gideon said softly, dangerously. "You worked with Sally Malone." "That's a damn lie," Briggs barked. But his deputy darted him a quick, panicked glance. Gideon canted his head. "She did the shooting. You cleared her escape route, and when your town bayed for justice, you gave them a warm body. Didn't matter if it was the right one." Winifred's hands clasped together until her knuckles whitened. Briggs stepped toward her. "Get over here, girl. You're under arrest." Before Gideon could react, before Briggs could take another step, Winifred moved, not backward, forward. She stepped off the porch and planted herself between Briggs and Gideon's gun barrel. "No," Winifred said. Her voice trembled, but it held. "I won't go with you. I won't let you hang me for your crimes. Not again." Briggs barked a laugh. "You think standing there makes a difference? You think this mountain man scares me?" Winifred swallowed hard, and for one heartbeat she looked back at Gideon. His eyes were locked on hers, surprised, proud, and fierce all at once. She turned back to the sheriff. "Gideon isn't what you should fear," she said. "Truth is, for a woman who had spent her whole life trying to be small, trying not to take up space, her words cut like steel." Briggs stepped toward her, but the deputy grabbed his arm. "Sheriff, maybe we should go. This is Blackwood's land. If we shoot, we'll be the ones hunted." Briggs jerked away. "Coward?" "A live coward," the deputy muttered. Gideon raised his gun. "Last chance to leave?" Briggs glared at Winifred, hatred boiling behind his eyes. "You'll regret this." Gideon's shot hit the dirt an inch from Briggs's boot. "I said," Gideon repeated, "last chance." This time, Briggs listened. The two lawmen mounted their horses and rode hard down the mountain trail, shrinking into the distance until the only sound left was the wind. Only then did Gideon lower his gun. He turned to Winifred, breath heaving, whether from fury or fear for her, she couldn't tell. "You stepped in front of my rifle," he said, voice thick. "I did." Her voice wavered. "You would have killed him." "I would have killed anyone who touched you." Winifred's knees weakened. "Gideon!" He dismounted in one powerful motion and crossed the space between them in 3 long strides. "You faced him," he said quietly, hands hovering near her shoulders without touching. "You didn't run. You didn't hide. You stood." Her breath trembled. "I didn't want you to fight alone." His voice deepened. "You think I've been alone all these years because there was no one to stand beside me? No, it's because no one ever chose to." He looked at her like she was the first dawn after decades of dark. Then, slowly, giving her every chance to pull back, he touched her cheek. "Winifred," he said, "you're braver than you know." Her eyes filled. "Only because you made me feel safe." "You are safe," he said, "as long as I breathe." The mountains stood silent around them, bearing witness to the moment when a hunted woman and a hardened bounty hunter stopped being strangers, bound by chance, and became something else, something fragile, something powerful, something that neither quite dared to name yet. The cabin felt different when they stepped back inside, not larger, not warmer, but steadier, as if the thick timber walls had absorbed the echo of Winifred's courage and were holding it in place. Gideon shut the door behind them and slid the iron bolt with a heavy click. Only then did he exhale, a long, controlled release of breath he'd held from the moment he saw Briggs near his door. Winifred hovered near the fire, her hands trembling despite her best efforts to hide it. Gideon crossed the room in slow, grounding strides and knelt before the hearth, feeding fresh logs into the glowing embers. When the flames brightened, he looked up at her. "You shook," he said quietly. "It wasn't judgment. It was observation, protection wrapped in honesty." Winifred nodded. "I was terrified." "But you didn't run," he replied. "Fear and bravery can live in the same body. You proved that." She swallowed, emotion swelling. "I wasn't brave alone." Gideon's gaze held hers. For the first time since she met him, his eyes weren't sharp or scrutinizing. They were open, unarmored. "I've seen killers stare down rifles with less strength than you showed today," he said. "You faced the man who tried to hang you." His voice softened, dropping into something almost reverent. "And you broke him without firing a shot." Winifred didn't know what to do with the warmth blooming in her chest, thick and overwhelming, like sunlight after too many winters. "You make me sound stronger than I feel." "You are," Gideon said simply. Silence settled between them, not empty, but full of something gentle, tentative. Gideon moved to sit in the chair closest to her. He didn't touch her. He didn't reach for her. But he angled his body toward her, an invitation without pressure. "Briggs will come back," Winifred whispered. "Yes," Gideon said, "but he won't reach you. I'll see to that." A softness crept into her expression. "You always say that I'm safe. Why?" Gideon's breath caught, just slightly. Then he leaned back in the chair, elbows braced on its arms, gaze steady and unflinching. "Because you are," he said. "Because this cabin is yours as long as you want it. Because I don't let harm near what I choose to protect." Her eyes widened. "What you choose to protect?" Gideon held her gaze for a heartbeat. "Two," then answered in the same quiet tone he shared only at night, when the world outside was dark and his walls were lower. I chose you the moment I saw you cry over a pot of stew you didn't want to spill. The confession struck like a soft blow, unexpected, powerful, tender. Winifred's breath trembled. Gideon! He rose slowly, giving her all the time she needed to pull away. She didn't. When he reached her, his hand hovered near her cheek again, always asking permission, even if he didn't speak the question aloud. This time she nodded. His fingers brushed her cheek, calloused and warm. She leaned into the touch, tears gathering in her eyes, but not from fear. This was something else entirely. You're safe here, he murmured. It's your home now, if you want it. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks, quiet, grateful tears she no longer tried to hide. I want it, she whispered. I want to stay. Gideon lowered his forehead to hers, their breaths mingling in the warm firelight. No kiss, not yet, just closeness, promise, a beginning, tender and unhurried. Outside, the wind swept through the pines like a lullaby. Inside, the fire glowed bright and steady, like the first fragile flame of something growing between them. Something worth protecting, something worth returning for, something that might one day become love. Stories like this remind us why we keep listening, because somewhere between the mountains, the danger, and the quiet moments by the fire, we see pieces of ourselves. We see strength where we thought there was weakness, courage hidden inside fear, and love growing in the most unexpected places. Wherever you are right now, on a bus, in your room, in another country entirely, I'm grateful you're here sharing this journey. Tell me, where in the world are you listening from today? And if you still believe that even the most wounded hearts deserve protection, stay close. The next story is already waiting for you.